A Christmas Nutcracker. Hello, this is Natasha, and I'm here to tell you a wonderful Christmassy story. About a nutcracker who looked like a toy soldier. The story comes from Germany, and it was made into a ballet by the famous Russian composer Tchaikovsky. And they crept back into their toy box or went back to sleep under the Christmas tree. Clara pulled herself back into her own room and fell into a deep sleep. She awoke late on Christmas morning. When she went downstairs, she found Godfather Drosselmeyer. He had already fixed the Nutcracker doll so that he was as good as new. "Thank you so much, dear Godfather," said Clara. "He's the best present I ever had." And then she told him about her strange dream. Godfather Drosselmeyer put his head on one side while he listened to her dream. And when she had finished telling him, he said, "Very interesting indeed. Your dream reminds me of a story. Let me tell it to you now." And this is the story that he told Clara. One Christmas, some bad mice crept into the royal palace and gobbled up all the meat that was meant for the king's special Christmas lunch. The king was furious, and he summoned his special inventor, whose name was Drosselmeyer, and who had made many wonderful things. He ordered him to make some mouse traps, which he did, and these were left in the palace kitchens. Soon they had caught lots of mice. The queen of the mice was furious, for the mice that lay in the traps were her children, and she climbed up onto the human queen's dressing room table, and just as the queen was going to bed, she said, "So, you dared to kill my children, did you? Well, I'll have my revenge. I will. I'll make your little princess turn quite ugly." The queen screamed, and her guards rushed into the room with drawn swords. But the mouse queen had disappeared behind the skirting board. It so happened that the king and queen had a beautiful daughter called Princess Pilpert. When the king heard about the threats of the mouse queen, he ordered that the bed of the princess must be guarded by 7 fierce cats, so that no mouse could get near her. But even cats must sleep. And when they were curled up and purring softly, the queen mouse crept past them and climbed up onto the end of Princess Pilpert's bed. There she said an evil magic spell, and in the morning, when the princess looked in the mirror, she saw that her face had been turned quite ugly. Her nose was long and had a wart on the end of it. Her eyes were small and squinty. Her hair was standing up on end and would not settle down, and she had spots on her chin. In fact, she was not just ugly, she was hideous. As you can imagine, the queen was utterly distraught, and the king, well, he was beside himself. He summoned Drosselmeyer again and gave him just 4 weeks to find a cure for the princess's ugliness, or else. But Drosselmeyer was an inventor, not a magician. He did not know any spells or anti-spells. He did not know what to do, and so he asked the court astrologer for his advice. And the advice he received was that Princess Pirlipat must eat a nut called a crackatuck. But first, the nut must be cracked by a boy who had never shaved, and he must do it without opening his eyes. And then he must take 7 steps backwards without stumbling. Well, Drosselmeer searched the land for a crackatuck nut, and eventually, after almost 4 weeks were up, he found one in a small shop. He brought it before the king. "This nut, sire," he said, "is the cure for your daughter's ugliness. She must eat it. But first, the nut must be cracked by a boy who has never shaved. And he must do it with his eyes closed, and then he must take 7 steps backwards without stumbling." The king was pleased that the cure for his daughter was so straightforward. He made a law that any boy who fulfilled the conditions and cured his daughter of ugliness would have the hand in marriage of the princess. And many boys came to the palace and tried to crack the nut, but not one could succeed. Until one day, Drosselmeer's own nephew was visiting his uncle in the palace. His face was still smooth, and he had not quite reached the age when he needed to shave. And his uncle asked if he would like to try his hand at cracking the nut. And the nephew held the nut between his teeth, and he closed his eyes. And he cracked it. Then he took 7 steps backwards, and on the 7th step, he stumbled. And although Princess Pirlipat was cured of her ugliness and was beautiful once more, Drosselmeer's nephew had caught the spell, and his face became ugly. In place of his nice kind mouth, he wore a stupid grin, and his smooth cheeks grew a white curly beard, and his head grew too large for his shoulders, and he looked not only ugly but stupid too. And although the king had promised that his daughter would marry the boy who cured her, his daughter refused to marry one who was so ugly. And the king agreed that it would not be proper for the princess to marry such an ugly, stupid-looking boy. And as Drosselmeer's nephew went home, people pointed and laughed at him. His teacher said he could no longer come to school because he looked so ridiculous. And so he stayed home, all alone. And that was the story that Godfather Drosselmeer told to Clara. And she thanked her godfather for telling her such an interesting story. But she had to admit that it made her feel rather sad. That night, Clara was thinking about the strange tale, and she could not fall asleep. After a long while of laying awake, she heard a voice whispering in her ear. It was the Mouse King who had come back to her, and he said, "Feed me your sweets, or I will bite off the head of your precious Nutcracker, and I will spit it out where nobody will find it again, not even your ingenious godfather." And Clara was so afraid for the Nutcracker that she got up and found some sweets for the Mouse King. He gobbled them up with his 7 heads in an instant, and then he demanded more. She went down to the pantry and found some cake, and he ate all that too, and the Christmas pudding, and the newly baked biscuits, and he still wanted more. "How much more shall I give you?" asked Clara. And the Mouse King said, "It is for me to say when I stop. Give me more, I say." And Clara began to cry. For what would her mother say in the morning when she found that all the sweets, cake and biscuits in the house had been eaten? And as she was crying, the Nutcracker came striding into the room. The Mouse King turned round and said, "Prepare to Die, oh ugly one! But the Nutcracker bit off the Mouse King's 7 heads, and soon he lay dead. And when he had defeated his enemy, Clara picked up her hero and took him back to her room, and instead of going to sleep, they watched a wonderful show. Toys came out to dance and sing for them all night long. Never before had Clara seen such a lovely performance. In the morning, she could not wait to tell her mother all about what she had seen. But when she began to explain about the 7-headed Mouse King and the brave little Nutcracker, her mother said, "Clara, your imagination is running wild. Don't you realise that what you saw is just a dream?" "But look, Mother," said Clara, reaching into her pocket. "Here are the 7 crowns of the Mouse King that the Nutcracker defeated." "Just toys," said her mother. "Stop being silly. Can't you see I'm busy?" And so Clara went into the nursery and sat down and cried. "It is true," she said. "And if the Nutcracker was a person, not just a Nutcracker, then I would love him and marry him even if he was ugly. I would not be like little Princess Pearlpat in that story. I would love a boy for his good heart, not for his handsome face." And as she said that, she heard the doorbell, followed by her godfather's voice in the hall. She went to see him and to tell him what she was thinking. But there was no need, for Godfather Drosselmeyer had come with his nephew, and his nephew was no longer ugly, but handsome and bright-eyed and smiling. For when Clara had promised to marry an ugly but good boy, she had broken the spell, and they both knew that one day they would be married to each other and live happily ever after. And that's the story of the Christmas Nutcracker. I do hope you enjoyed that magical story. It's a little bit different from the famous ballet version of it, which has lots of different dances, including the Sugar Plum Fairy.